Freehold Baptist Church is what it was originally called. Sadly today it's known more for the building than it is actually the history that took place on this spot and in this building. And as we mentioned, a lot of the history was actually in this building. In May of 1766, this church started with 47 members dismissed from Middletown. That doesn't mean they behaved badly, but that's the way a lot of the old Baptist churches did it, is they would dismiss members and they would move into another area so that they could make sure that the church would take sure footing. And just so you, I don't know if you've ever heard this or seen this analogy in Baptist history, but they used to liken it to a big strong oak tree, and they said that one of the arms would come down and then they would cover it up with dirt, and then a new church would spring up and then the arm would go back to its full strength. And that's just the way they looked at it. And so they did that in reference to the way that they do this. And so again, that Middletown church, it's just so sad, we couldn't even really enjoy stopping and talking to the people just because of where it's at and stuff today. But they just did so much in the state of New Jersey. John Coward was the pastor at the time of the construction of this building. He's buried here, and he died in 1760. This is the first full-time pastorate of the fighting chaplain or the fighting preacher, David Jones. Amen. And we talked about him already so much and gave you a lot of information about Davy Jones. But remember, he preached at the Great Valley Baptist Church, and Jones pastored here for about 8 years, and so he was here as well. The house, so the New Jersey Baptists, the Pennsylvania Baptists, we talked about how those are all kind of intermingled, and they all knew each other, and they all worked together and such. That Philadelphia Association was kind of the tie that bound them all together. So you have some key churches in Pennsylvania, that's some key ones in New Jersey that were real instrumental in that. The house here on the property that was the original site of the parsonage, which was about a third of the size of the current home that's sitting there. In the cemetery, you'll notice again, there's a lot of homes is buried here. In fact, I can see them from here. This cemetery probably has just about as many or more than any of them that we found homes is in. If you just walk through here, they're just literally everywhere. And so the posterity of Obadiah Homes is probably more in this area than anywhere else in America. But Middletown again birthed this church. Remember, originally Middletown was where Homedale is, and then also the Piscataway Church, the Middletown Church, and this church all came out of the original Homedale/Middletown Church. Several Revolutionary War soldiers are buried here. Again, that just bolsters the idea. Now, we're going to talk about a guy when we get to the First Baptist Church of Philadelphia. You remember we talked about the materials towards a Baptist history by Morgan Edwards, and we quote Morgan Edwards so much. By the way, if you want to study the separate Baptists, either you're making up a bunch of stories, you're trying to put distant pieces together, or you have your own theories, or you lean heavily on Morgan Edwards because he's almost one of the only sources we have for really, first source materials concerning the separate Baptists. He is the one that told us, that he counted about 1,500 families that left the Piedmont region, when the Battle of Alamance was lost between the Regulators and Governor Tryon, that he camped at all their churches and dispersed those congregations and took their lands and all of that. And the idea there was, of course, the devil got there a day late and a dollar short because the revival's arms had spread everywhere already. But he documented the 1,500 families that left. So a lot of the key information that we use in all the different Baptist history in the East, especially, Morgan Edwards is kind of the source for that. So, but anyway, when I say that to say this. Thank God for Morgan Edwards, and he was one of the only Baptists that I ever found that really was not valiant for fighting in the Revolution, or for others fighting in the Revolution, or for taking up arms, or for having a revolution. So, weigh all that out, thank God, but then, would we have held his position? Probably not. What I found is, to the exclusion of Morgan Edwards, just about every Baptist I've ever studied was for the Revolution. In fact, I believe it was a Virginia historian, Howison, who's a secular historian. He said that there was no more ardent patriots in the Revolution than the Baptists of Virginia. None more heroic in battle, none more ready to march to the fields and to sacrifice everything to go and fight the Revolution than the Baptists of Virginia. But that's the way it was in all the colonies. But so anyway, the fighting Baptist preacher was here, Davy Jones. Again, tons of Revolutionary War soldiers are buried here, bunch of Baptists, all right? I want to read you something, and this comes out of an old book. It's History of the Baptists in New Jersey by Thomas Griffiths from 1821. Quoting, Upper Freehold was an original Baptist community having with the exception of Homedale and Cohansey, the earliest Baptist house of worship in the colony. And what he means when he says an original Baptist community, he means that when it started, it was just full of Baptist people. It was just a bunch of Baptist people that came to this area and started this, okay? Let me go on here if I may. With the exception of Homedale and Cohansey, it is the earliest Baptist house of worship in the colony. The son of Reverend James Ashton, the first pastor of the old church, moved to Upper Freehold in an early day, and dying a bachelor, his name is lost. Now, you remember maybe one of the early preachers we said was over there at Middletown was a guy named Ashton. I said so much, it probably just went by, but so that's the relationship that he's talking about there. He bequeathed property to the church. Upper Freehold became the center, whence Middletown pastors radiated from the ocean to the Delaware River and to far south of Trenton, covering a vast territory. So this was a strong outpost, amen? And so they're trying to, again, scatter churches around. An account of the Brays naming their settlement in Hunterdon County Baptist Town, Homedale, was adopted for the old Baptist Town as a memorial name. So you have all these places wanting to call themselves Baptist Town, and so hence the old Baptist Town is now called Homedale, was what Griffiths was relating there. Just kind of an interesting little fact there. The parsonage being at Homedale, pastors went from there to their scattered flock, and grouping them into mutuality, laid the foundations of many Baptist churches. From the first, these Baptist churches did not limit themselves. Houses of worship were built in distant parts, and periodic appointments were made to which the people would travel 30 miles on foot or on horseback along bridle paths, taking their children with them. How many ever been on a 30-mile ride with your kids and they about drove you crazy, amen? These people were walking 30 miles with their children to hear a message, amen? And I don't know how they made it through it, amen? But along bridle paths, okay? This in part explains, listen, why long sermons came into fashion, amen? I thought it was called the Terry Danford disease, amen? But anyway, and so maybe they needed one of those hourglasses, all right? But long sermons came into fashion. Listen to Griffiths. He says, those who made these sacrifices, this distant walking and riding, were not content with a taste of the word, nor with platitudes. They wanted substance and plenty of sound doctrine, something to think on for a month or months, and not a milk and water diet. Amen? And so the people here, they wanted to, I remember when I was in Romania, and we rode, and these people walked 6 miles down this muddy, frozen roads. And when we got there, they had an exhorter get up 30 minutes in the mountains, northern Romania, kind of way out there. And then I remember they had singing for an hour. And when they sang, they all looked up into heaven. It was just an amazing thing. And then when they wanted me to preach, they wanted me to preach at least 2 hours or you're a liberal. And then they had a guy get up and exhort afterwards and tell you how to apply the message. We'd get there about 6:30, and I think we were leaving about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. They didn't just get there and say, man, we're going to do a little sermonette and just walk 30 miles back, amen? And so they wanted to be taught and strengthened. So if they couldn't make it back, if something happened, they had something to chew on and to mull over. These people came to church to get in. They didn't come to get out, amen? And to uproot your life after you've already uprooted your life and come to this region, to go another 30, 40, 50 miles just to see another Baptist community and Baptist church started, that speaks a lot to where their heart was and their understanding of the Great Commission. And so would to God we'd see more of that today, amen? There's a lot of great stuff here. There is a neat marker back here that you definitely want to get a picture of. There's homes by the dozens all over the place. And then if anybody locates Coward, I can't remember exactly where he's at here, but if you find that pastor that we mentioned, that would be a blessing if you would relate that to the rest of us. Again, he was a pastor at the time of the construction of this building, all right? He died in 1760. So again, this is the oldest, and please come read the signs. Now listen, when I say that, I also want to remind you this. When we get to the next church, the oldest Baptist church in Pennsylvania, we are going to get inside to see the building. There's a big monument outside put there by the Baptist History Preservation Society. Please, you'll do yourself a disservice if you don't read the whole monument. It tells that awesome history, and I'm pretty sure that one's two-sided, if I'm not mistaken. And so you definitely want to read that, but avail yourself to these. That one just simply talks about the cemetery, wherever that other one was. But these here, two, you definitely want to read, amen? And so we'll go ahead and cut you loose, and it's 1:57. We said